This story is about Ada Blackjack. In 1921, Ada joined a doomed expedition to Wrangel Island. It was a frozen wasteland north of Siberia. It was led by men with more ambition than sense. She wasn't an explorer. She wasn't trained. She was a mother desperate to help her sick son. I'm Elle, and today we're diving into the icebound story of Ada Blackjack, a woman who went from seamstress to Arctic survivor, in a story so wild it sounds fictional, but it's not. It's a tale where survival meets the surreal and the forgotten ones rise above the legends. In the summer of 1921, Nome, Alaska, buzzed with its usual mix of gold rush dreamers and rugged locals. Among them was Ada Blackjack. She was a 23-year-old indigenous woman who was born in 1898 in Spruce Creek. It was a tiny settlement near Nome. Life wasn't kind to Ada. She had lost her husband, Jack Blackjack. Yeah, I know. My guess, it's an indigenous nickname. And 2 of her 3 children had passed away as well. Her surviving son, Bennett, was frail, battling tuberculosis. Ada was desperate to afford his medical care. With only an 8th grade education and skills as a seamstress, opportunities were scarce for an indigenous woman in a frontier town. She wasn't trained in survival skills, but when a chance to join an Arctic expedition came knocking, Ada was like, oh yeah. Her first thought was sewing for explorers. I can do that. And the pay's not half bad. She decided to go all in. The expedition was led by the ambitious and legendary bad planner, Canadian explorer, we're going to abbreviate, Vil Stephenson. He aimed to claim Wrangel Island for Canada. It was a desolate speck located 300 miles north of Siberia. Stephenson, a man with more charisma than caution, believed that the Arctic was ripe for colonization. Good old Vil, he'd previously sent a team in 1913 that ended in disaster. The ship was crushed, crew stranded, many didn't make it. Sounds like the perfect way to dig yourself and your crew into a deep, deep hole. So Vil, being undeterred, assembled a new crew for 1921. It was 4 young dudes, Alan Crawford, Lorne Knight, Fred Maurer, and Milton Gall, and Ada, of course. She was hired to sew warm clothing for the team. Ada wasn't thrilled about leaving Bennett, but the $50 a month wage was a fortune compared to her usual gigs. So she entrusted her son to a local orphanage, promising to return with enough money to fix everything. On September 9th of 1921, Ada and the 4 young dudes, plus a cat named Vic, boarded the Silver Wave and sailed for Wrangel Island. Yeah, I know, a cat. I had to look into it, so here's the info I found. Vic was short for Victoria. The cat had been born on the ship the men had taken to Nome and was given to them by the ship's captain. They took her with them on the expedition, proclaiming that she was their good luck charm. Okay, so Stephenson, the leader of this exploration, or designer, he wasn't attending this party by trekking out into the middle of nowhere in sub-zero temperatures. He just planned the expedition. So he assumed they'd survive a year with limited supplies. You know what they say, when you assume, it makes an ass out of you and me. But why would Stephenson risk dying when he could send underqualified 20-something-year-olds and a single indigenous woman to do it for him? While he hangs out in civilization writing books about how brilliant he was. The island, uninhibited and icebound, was about 100 miles long, with jagged cliffs, tundra, and polar bears that weren't exactly friendly. The plan was simple. Set up camp, survive for a year or 2. Oh my God, a year or 2. Whew. And prove the island could support a Canadian outpost. Stephenson promised a supply ship would arrive the next summer with reinforcements. Let's see how well that goes down. The team landed on Wrangel's rocky shore, hauling crates of canned food, rifles, and Ada's sewing kit. The 4 young men celebrated their arrival. But Ada fell silent when the boat that brought them there left the island. She walked alone on the gravel beach to watch the ship fade into the distance and cried. Struggling in the new environment and feeling threatened by the others, Ada became extremely anxious and withdrawn, which led her to neglecting the duties of cooking, cleaning, and sewing. This in turn caused the men to grow more and more aggressive towards her. From the Diary of Lorne Knight, dated November 23, 1921, it states, "The seamstress refused to patch a pair of boots today, so I tied her to the flagpole until she promised to repair them. Kindness failing to accelerate, I am trying something more forceful." Doesn't sound like Mr. Knight was a very nice guy. Ultimately, Ada persevered. She decided she needed to survive for her son, and the fog eventually lifted. She threw herself into her work, and as winter descended, the 5 people and 1 cat united on Wrangel Island. The men, all in their 20s, were a lively bunch. Crawford, the leader, was earnest but green. Knight, a burly Alaskan, loved a joke. Maurer, a survivor of Stevenson's earlier fiascos, was quietly determined. And Gall, the youngest, was the group's scribe, always scribbling in his journal. And Ada, the only woman and indigenous person, felt like an outsider. The men called her the Eskimo woman. She kept her head down mending boots and parkas while the men hunted seals and polar bears. The first winter hit like a freight train. Temperatures plunged to 40 below and blizzards buried their canvas tents. Food dwindled faster than expected. It turns out that polar bears are harder to hunt when they're hungry too. The group eagerly awaited the arrival of the relief ship. However, by the summer of 1922, when it came and went and no ship broke through the horizon, they realized they weren't coming. Stevenson's grand plan had hit a snag. The new Bolshevik government of Russia had decided to officially make a claim to Wrangel Island, and the Canadian government, which had funded the original voyage, was reluctant to challenge them. Stevenson was forced to seek outside investors to fund the relief ship. By the time he came up with the funds, the sea ice had already blocked the ship's passage to Wrangel Island. The relief ship, the Donaldson, got stuck in ice and turned back. The men tried to stay upbeat, with Knight cracking jokes about Arctic cuisine. He was referring to the boiled seal blubber. Delicious. Ada, meanwhile, leaned on memories of Bennett in her spare time to keep her spirits up. By the summer of 1922, things got dire. The men were weakening, especially Knight, who developed scurvy. His gums were bleeding and his legs were swelling. And by January of 1923, Crawford, Maurer, and Gall made a desperate decision. They would trek 100 miles across the sea ice to Siberia for help. Ada, now caring for a bedridden man, stayed behind with Vic the cat, who became her unofficial therapist. The 3 men vanished into the white void, never to be seen again. Their fate remained a mystery, though the Arctic's brutal ice likely claimed them. Ada was now alone with a dying man and a scrappy little cat, facing a grim reality. Ada kept a journal. It's incredible. It's so raw, practical, and emotionally restrained. She wrote about what she did each day: hunting, gathering driftwood, sewing, trying not to die. And between the lines, you get this haunting glimpse of someone slowly realizing she's the last human left and might not be rescued at all. Knight's condition worsened, and by June 1923, he was too weak to move. She documented his slow death from scurvy in heartbreaking detail. She stayed with him and cooked for him, tried to keep him clean, and wrote about his condition every day. Ada developed scurvy symptoms, and with no survival skills, she taught herself to shoot a rifle, hunt seals, and duck, despite never firing a gun before. She reinforced the walls of the storage tent with driftwood. She built a sleeping platform, made a stove out of empty kerosene cans, built an observation deck on top of the tent with driftwood to watch for polar bears. She hauled firewood. She built skin boats for hunting seals, built traps, collected eggs, and even skinned game, all while dodging polar bears that sniffed around camp like uninvited neighbors. She even sewed her son a pair of moccasins to give to him upon her return to Nome. Night, in rare lucid moments, marveled at her grit, reportedly saying, "You're tougher than all of us." When Night died on June 23rd of 1923, Ada was truly alone. She buried his body under a tarp, whispering a prayer, and turned to Vic for moral support. "Don't you dare die on me, cat," she likely told her furry sidekick. She wrote about his death, and it read like something from a psychological horror story, except it was tragically real. Her journal paints an incredible story of pain, her struggles, and her success. For 2 months, Ada survived solo on Wrangel Island. She rationed the last of the canned foods, hunted seabirds. She kept writing simple entries like, "Shot a seal today." Vic ate well. Her talks with God and thoughts of Bennett kept her going, though she later admitted to moments of despair, wondering if she'd ever see her son again. The Arctic tested her daily. There were blizzards, her hunger, and the eerie silence of an empty island. But Ada, the seamstress with no wilderness experience, outsmarted it all. On August 20th of 1923, Ada woke to a noise outside her tent. The Donaldson, a rescue ship, finally appeared. The crew found Ada thin but alive, with Vic purring by her side. She'd survived 2 years in one of the harshest places on Earth, earning the nickname the female Robinson Crusoe. The rescuers were stunned, expecting no survivors. Ada, likely exhausted but relieved, she returned to Nome, reuniting with Bennett and using her expedition money to fund his treatment. Ada was met with frenzied attention from the press. She was largely hailed as a hero, but she was also met with suspicion, and she endured hateful rumors. Ada wanted none of the attention, although Stephenson offered her less pay than he originally promised. Ada accepted it, desperate to reunite with Bennett. Ada Blackjack's story earned Vil Stevenson tremendous profit and praise. Ada herself battled poverty for much of her life, although promised royalties from Stevenson's book based in part on her diary. She received nothing. She remarried and had another son on September 14th of 1924. She named him Billy Blackjack Johnson. Unfortunately, Ada soon contracted tuberculosis and was forced to place her 2 sons in an orphanage between 1927 to 1937 while she recovered. This poor woman, she can't catch a break. Ada lived in Seattle and Spokane before finally moving back to Alaska, where she continued to live a quiet, mostly private life. She passed away in 1983 at the age of 85. Ada's first son, Bennett Blackjack, suffered from chronic tuberculosis and other debilitating illnesses for the rest of his life, and eventually passed away in 1972 at the age of 58. As for Ada's second son, Billy, he served in the Army and was stationed in Germany from 1945 to 1948, after which he moved to Seattle with his wife. Throughout his life, he was active in many Alaska Native organizations and a registered lobbyist before passing away in 2003. Her expedition journal and the men's diaries, preserved in archives, tell of her courage and her resourcefulness. Her life is a story without fanfare, of a woman who outlived polar bears, scurvy, and an expedition planned by a man who didn't even bother to show up. It's cold, brutal, and quietly miraculous. Ada Blackjack's legacy endures as a quiet but powerful symbol of strength. After her return to Nome, she lived modestly, raising her sons with the same fierce determination that kept her alive on Wrangel Island. She never sought recognition, yet her story, etched in her understated journal, speaks volumes. Ada faced unimaginable odds, grief, isolation, and an unforgiving Arctic. And she emerged not just a survivor, but a mother who turned desperation into defiance. Her life reminds us that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wield a needle, a rifle, and an unbreakable will to see their children again. Would you have survived alone on that island? Would you have curled up with the cat and cried? Be honest. If Ada Blackjack's story hit you the way it hit me, we'll see you again next time for more miracles. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Until next time, bye-bye.